he'd already be spinning out an elaborate web of lies to cover up the truth.
Well, the truth is usually just an excuse for lack of imagination.
Hey there, interwebs, and welcome back to Original Facts. We've discussed avocados before on this channel, but since then I've learned that a slightly obsolete name for one is an alligator pear, and you can easily see the connection. Like a pear, the avocado is a tapering, oblong fruit, but its skin is rough and dark green like an alligator's. This isn't the full story, however. The alligator half of its name is also likely derived from the archaic Spanish word aguacate, which itself comes from the classic Nahuatl word aguacatl, all referring to millennials' favorite fatty green fruit. Aguacatl is also Mayan slang for testicle, akin to the Spanish huevos. Additionally, as mentioned before in this series, the word alligator is derived from the Spanish term el lagarto, meaning the lizard. The word avocado can also refer to a dark shade of green, the rough color of the fruit, like orange or aubergine. The latter entered English as the French loanword aubergine, via the Arabic al-badanjan, from the Persian badanjan. So why the hell do we call it an eggplant? It doesn't even look like an egg. Or does it? These fruits are also eggplants, and noticeably much more eggy than their purple kin. This makes their common English name the ovoid equivalent of the vegetable lamb of Tartary, which is why they're also sometimes called the vegetable eggs of Persia. An eggcorn, meanwhile, is the alteration of an unfamiliar word or phrase due to mishearing it and reconstructing it with known elements, typically homophones. Examples include old-timers' disease, on tender hooks, and scandally clad, as well as eggcorn itself, based on misinterpreting an acorn as a corn, i.e. a small hard seed like a peppercorn, which is roughly egg-shaped. A Fang-corn is when this occurs with made-up proper nouns in sci-fi and fantasy, which, due to their fictional nature, are new to the audience and thus prone to being misheard, inspired by Tolkien's Fangorn Forest. Many of these eggcorns and fangcorns come about because the English language is, to put it succinctly, confusing, and words' etymologies are often not what you'd reasonably expect. For example, a caddy, or golf slave as they prefer to be called, is the guy who carries your clubs around because your lazy ass can't be bothered, while a tea caddy is a small box used for storing and transporting tea, but is etymologically unrelated to the golf caddy who transports your clubs. The golf caddy is the Scottish form of the French cadet, whereas tea caddy comes from the Anglo-Indian unit of weight called a catti. The minute in minute stake is not the 60-second length of time, but rather the adjective minute, meaning small, referring to the product's negligible thickness. It's like Chopin's minute waltz. The word catalogue is a mutation of the phrase cattle log, a logbook in which ranchers would keep track of their livestock. When they brought the cattle to market, potential buyers would be given this book, or a copy of it, to thumb through while deciding on what they wanted to purchase. Likewise, the verb to tether began as a contraction of tie together, and slob is a shortening of slimy blob. We're all fairly familiar with Chinese chopsticks and Japanese chopsticks, with the latter being shorter and pointier than their mainland counterparts, but you've probably never seen Korean chopsticks in America. They come in sets of 3. This piece of barware is called a Collins glass, but its name comes from Irish Gaelic and means dog soldier or war pup. The name used to be Cuilinglach, with the front half meaning small dog or pup, and the latter half meaning young warrior, such as we see in the word gallow glass. I'm not sure why it's called that, but people have an interesting habit of associating beverage containers with combatants, such as calling empty bottles dead soldiers. You've probably heard of the verb carouse, meaning essentially to party or make merry. Its present participle is carousing, and its purely noun form is carousal. You may notice that, barring one vowel, this is the word carousel, which is just carouse with an L tacked onto the end, and another name for a merry-go-round. Clearly the words are related, right? Wrong. Although both words entered English via French, carouse comes from the German phrase gar aus, short for gar austrinken, meaning drink all out or guzzle. This puts it closer in original meaning to the word symposium, coming from the ancient Greek symposion, meaning drinking together, and referring to a party featuring drinks and intellectual discussion. Carousel, meanwhile, comes from the Italian carosello, said to be derived in some way from the Italian word for cart, caro, from the Latin carus, but this claim is unsubstantiated. In truth, the origins of the word carousel are not known for certain. Additionally, on a personal note, I used to work part-time as a carousel operator, don't ask, and there would occasionally be a coughing child on the ride, producing clouds of germs that everyone else would then be slowly wafted through on resin horseback. Throughout the holiday season, children were reliably crop-dusting the other patrons with their horrible diseases, so I like to think of it as a typhoid merry-go-round. Speaking of carousing, Oktoberfest occurs mostly in September. This is because the original Oktoberfest was created to celebrate the marriage of Crown Prince Ludwig of Bayern, or Bavaria, auf English, and Princess Theresa von Saxe-Hildburghausen in 1810, and recall that the Bolsheviks' October Revolution actually occurred in November. It's only called the October Revolution because Tsarist Russia hadn't yet adopted the Gregorian calendar and was still on the Julian system, and Oktoberfest is the same way. Additionally, I was going to joke that Oktoberfest was celebrating the marriage of King Ludwig and Princess Peach, because in the original Japanese release of Super Mario Bros., King Koopa, aka Bowser, was actually named King Ludwig. Yes, just as Mario sounded generically foreign by dint of being stereotypically Italian, so too did Ludwig by being stereotypically German. Is it ridiculous? Sure, but is it any sillier than Princess Toadstool before she was Princess Peach, or Dr. Eggman before he was Dr. Robotnik? And let's be honest, Gojira was still under copyright. The name Ludwig did eventually make its way into English Mario canon with Ludwig von Koopa, eldest of the Koopalings. On the subject of Japanese video games that defined millennial childhoods, a somewhat popular theory claims that during the development of the original Pokemon game, the sprites for Dragonite and Gyarados were swapped. The argument goes that Magikarp is a chonky orange fish with yellow tendrils sprouting from its face, and Dragonite is a chonky orange dragon with yellow tendrils sprouting from its head, whereas Gyarados is a slender blue serpent like Dry Martini and Dragon Drop before it. This claim has been repeatedly debunked, but Diglett and Dugtrio had a scrapped third evolution called Dug Dozen, which was just a mountain of like 12 Dugs, and Rapidash's abandoned Mega Evolution had wings made of fire, forming a sort of flaming Caraptor. There was also concept art of an alternate Smoliv evolution called Swoliv, which was basically just Smoliv as a head on a giant buff body. Perhaps you've heard of Grape Ape. You might know it as a cartoon, but you should know it was a cereal first, albeit briefly. There are currently 4 General Mills Monster cereal mascots. Frankenberry and Count Chocula were the first, followed soon after by Boo-Berry, and Carmella Creeper is the most recent, but there were discontinued cereals too, including Fruit Brute, Fruity Yummy Mummy, and Grape Ape, which was obviously grape-flavored and styled after King Kong. This was the early 80s, and back when cereal boxes still came with good toys, although Grape Ape's fruit-flavored plastic toy Grape Whistles proved to be a commercial misstep. After less than a year on shelves, Grape Ape was dropped from the lineup, but the character was sold to Hanna-Barbera for a quick buck as cartoon fodder. A slightly outdated term for a hired detective is a private dick, and they made for popular protagonists in film noir mysteries of the 1940s, leading to movies of this subgenre being known as dick pics. The Lone Ranger wore a white outfit and rode a white horse, and Mel Brooks parodied this in Yellow in Blazing Saddles, but production struggled to find a yellow horse, so they hired a white one and dyed it yellow. Something similar was done with Rua in The Beastmaster. The script called for a Black Panther, but tigers are easier to train, so the production team just got a couple of those and painted them black. There have been rumors swirling for decades that one of the tigers was fatally poisoned from licking the black paint off of itself, but I haven't found any reliable source verifying this claim. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and although it made him more vulnerable to predation, this form of honest signaling of fitness combined with countless generations of sexual selection pressure to become the defining feature of the subspecies RT rudolfensis. This name also has the junior synonym RT erythrincos, not to be confused with the clown genus of the same name mentioned earlier in this series. Coincidentally, the specific name rudolfensis also belongs to an extinct hominid currently assigned to the Homo genus, although some argue for its placement in Australopithecus or Kenyanthropus instead. I personally believe Rudolph should have been named Rufus or Rupert, meaning red and bright fame, respectively. Who wouldn't want to sing the tale of Rupert the Rubescent Rangifer? Olive, the other reindeer, was named for the bright green hue of her nose and often flew on Rudolph's right, so the other air traffic knew if Santa's flying sleigh was coming or going. Speaking of sleds, the bobsled was named after its inventor, Robert K. Sledowski. The K stands for Katzenberg, as he was named after his great-grandfather, Robert Katzenberg, who invented the bobcat by crossbreeding a lynx with a skid steer. Likewise, the hyacinth macaw was named after its discoverer, Scottish ornithologist Hyacinth Macaw. Side note, skid steer is not a synonym for cowslip, despite both terms being composed of synonyms like butt dial and booty call. The first telephone call, by the way, was made by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876. Exactly a decade later, the first call was made asking someone about their vehicle's extended warranty, Karl Benz's patent Motorwagen, the first modern car, having been invented just the previous year. Mr. Bell's last name, incidentally, is why we also refer to making a phone call as giving someone a ring. Other inventions named after their inventors include the gangster's iconic Tommy gun, invented by Thomas Gunn, and the Cutts compensator, part of what gives the subgun its distinctive look, invented by Colonel Richard Cutts. Special mention must go to sodium and its discoverer, the Roman alchemist and accountant Undecimus Sodius Mercurius, whose cognomen was derived from Mercury or Hermes Trismegistus, the Roman god of chemistry. Or near enough. In fact, the word salary comes from the Latin salarium, meaning payment, and is related to salarius, meaning salt. Thus, Sodius was later deified in Japan as the earliest recorded salaryman. The hot dog, or more accurately the beef frank, is also named after its inventor, Benjamin Big Beef Franklin. Just as the initialism BJ can be further shortened to Beej, Franklin's initials BF led to his nickname Big Beef. Ironically, we know he preferred to pork, and his hot dogs were actually turkey dogs as part of his campaign to have the bird adopted as the national symbol, rather than the bald eagle. He also invented bifocals, the urinary catheter, and swim fins, which he called mermaid shoes in jest, as obviously mermaids don't wear shoes, but not the swivel chair. That was invented by his colleague, Thomas Jefferson, although a rotating seat was designed by a German nobleman 270 years prior. He also didn't invent electricity any more than Newton invented gravity, but he did invent the lightning rod and experimentally used electricity to kill turkeys, remarking, "Birds killed in this manner eat uncommonly tender." The Cliff Bar was invented by Clifford Barton, and Brunswick stew was likewise named after the chef who created it, Stuart Brunswick. But where does his name come from? The name Ewart is pretty obscure these days, and as such it probably doesn't mean much to most of you, but all of the sword nerds in the audience will get immediately excited if I say Ewart Park or Ewart Oakshott. I bring it up now because it's also the name of a relatively obscure saint, martyred in the mid-400s or thereabout, and that's where we get the much more common modern name of Stuart. It began as a compression and or misreading of Saint Ewart, and it's not alone in its origins. The name Stephen likewise began as Saint Evan, the anglicized version of Inan, the patron saint of Irvine, Ayrshire, in Scotland. Another Christian saint is Barbara, patron saint of lightning, fireworks, artillery, and mathematicians, among other things. We've discussed barbarians before on this channel, but I have something else to add on the subject. As Christianity expanded into northern Europe in the latter half of the first millennium, it became a tale of Christendom, i.e. civilization, versus pagan barbarism in the popular consciousness. Christians versus barbarians. That's why I find it interesting that some groups of early Christians referred to themselves as barbarians in honor of Saint Barbara, in order to set themselves apart from the Roman and Greek pagans. I would expect nothing less to honor the patron saint of all things badass. Santa Barbara, California is also named after the martyred maiden, and the local demonym is Santa Barbarian, conjuring up mental images of an older, more Odinesque Santa Claus, sporting a huge white wizard's beard of barbarism. That being said, the given name Barbara shares a lexical root with barbarian, and originally meant stranger or foreigner, as does Xena, it being the feminine form of Xeno, Greek for foreign, or alien, cf. xenomorph. That's Xena with an E, by the way, because Xena with an I is an unconventional alternate spelling of Christina, substituting an X or Greek letter chi for Christ, as is commonly done for Xmas. And of course, Christina as a girl's name means she-Christian. For those struggling to keep up, this means Xena was barbarian, but Xena and barbarian both mean Christian. On the subject of names, Nimrod didn't always mean dimwit. In fact, it's a biblical name and referred to a mighty hunter, and is still technically a synonym for hunter, although its use has drastically diminished. It only acquired its current pejorative status in the mid-20th century, thanks to, of all things, Looney Tunes cartoons. In 1948, Daffy Duck disparagingly dubbed Elmer Fudd My Little Nimrod in What Makes Daffy Duck, and Bugs Bunny would sarcastically apply the same term to Yosemite Sam 3 years later in Rabbit Every Monday. That's right, cartoons for children basically changed the meaning of a word from remarkably competent hunter to incompetent nincompoop. In the words of Thulsa Doom, that is power! Of course, Nimrod isn't in a unique position. The term butthead also used to refer to hunters. Obviously, the word butt in this case does not refer to the buttocks, and while you might think this is in some way related to the term to butt heads, that's not correct either. It actually pertains to archery targets, which in medieval England were known as butts. A toxophiliac who spends lots of time at the archery range was a butthead. Eventually, the term shifted from meaning hunter to layabout, as archery shifted from a necessary survival skill for hunting and warfare to a pleasant recreational activity, and from there it was only a short jump in meaning from sluggard to dullard. Way back in Volume 1, I told you the outdoor retailer, LL Bean, is named after its founder, Leon Wood Bean, but the director of the UK's Heat Pump Federation is Bean Beanland. If the two of them somehow had a son together, his name would presumably be Leon Wood Bean Beanland, or Libby for short. Also in Volume 1, I told you a female wombat is called a wombatina, and a male wombat is called a wombert. Likewise, a female robin is a robina, and a male robin is called a robert. Sorta. Robina is a more feminine form of the gender-neutral name Robin, which began as a diminutive form of the male name Robert. Speaking of gender-neutral names, Taylor Lautner's wife is Taylor Lautner, and the wife of rockabilly musician Roy Orbison was Joy Orbison. Their son was named Boy Orbison, and his father was Orby Lee Orbison. This name was later borrowed as the secret identity of D-list Spider-Man villain Sphere Factor, who would often boast, "Sphere is my middle name," as he attacked people with weaponized juggler's balls, kinda like Hobgoblin. This felonious punk shouldn't be confused with the jazz musician Thelonious Monk, whose middle name really was Sphere. Comic book characters' identities aren't set in stone, either, seeming to change whenever a story gets a new writer, or if the old writer gets bored, and Harley Quinn is no exception. In one Batman arc, Harley was revealed to have been born with a parasitic conjoined twin named Sidecar. Personally, I would have gone with Harley Twin. In the Batman story and the Executioner wore stiletto heels, we get another set of conjoined twins, one black and the other white, hence the two-faced criminal punk's alias Two-Tone, not to be confused with the criminal Two-Face, who only has one face, confusingly. The two-faced Roman god Janus lends his name to the month of January, it being the beginning of the new year and him being the god of doorways and new beginnings, and closing time by semisonic. March is likewise named after Mars, and July and August are named in honor of Julius and Augustus Caesar. September, October, November, and December simply mean 7, 8, 9, and 10, despite currently being the 9th through 12th months. In order to alleviate some of the confusion, 19th century Senator William Nilson proposed renaming the last 2 months Elevember and Twelvember. On a related note, Autism Awareness Month has recently been renamed Autistic Peoples Month as part of a cultural shift toward person-first language, but only after narrowly defeating Neurodivember in committee. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.
If you lie all the time, nobody's going to believe you, even when you're telling the truth.
Are you sure that's the point, Doctor?
Of course. What else could it be?
That you should never tell the same lie twice.